Welcome to the Allen D. Lehman Swine Conference, and specifically to this Swine Nutrition Pre-Conference Workshop in the 2020 edition. My name is Pedro Urriola. I'm a Research Associate Professor in the Department of Animal Sciences and the Department of Veterinary Population Medicine at the University of Minnesota. This year we have a very exciting topic about water. What you should know about the forgotten nutrient. This workshop is going to be about 80 minutes of presentations from guest speakers, and at the end you will have time to questions or do questions to the speakers. But also during the presentations, you can use the chat box at the right-hand side of the viewing console to ask questions to the presenters. Water represents about 80% of the weight in a newborn piglet, and is one of the most essential of all nutrients, meaning nutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, vitamins, and minerals that compose the diet of a pig. Yet in many nutrition audits and in many of the routine work, swine professionals tend to overlook or make assessments of the quantity, quality, and methods that are using to deliver water to pigs. And this leads to misunderstanding and mismanagement of the important resource. In some cases, we provide less water to pigs that they need, or sometimes we waste this important resource. Or sometimes we do medications or applications in a manner that is not appropriate. Therefore, has been called for many years water as the forgotten nutrient. Well, the intent of this workshop is to stop that, to give you information regarding water use in swine nutrition. We have invited a set of experts that are going to answer many of these questions and go from the basic standpoints of water requirements all the way to SLAT level or apply level information that you can take to your operations or to your professional experience. With that, then the first presentation is going to be from Dr. John Patient. John is a professor in animal sciences at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. He is an expert in swine nutrition and has ample experience in the topic of water. He has written book chapters and manuscripts regarding the requirements of pigs on water, and many of usual manuals that people have used for many years. Today's Dr. Patient talk is with the title, What Makes Water So Important for Pigs and Why Do We Often Take It for Granted? This talk will be sponsored by the National Pork Board from the gracious contribution. With that, further ado, Dr. Patient.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with you this morning to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is water. And before going any further, I want to thank Pedro for coming up with the idea of having a water session and also for inviting me to be a part of this session. You know, water was the first topic that I started doing research on when I started my research career more years ago than I'm prepared to admit on camera. But it has been a favorite topic of mine for quite some time. My role is to introduce the topic of water and lead into the next three presentations, which I have already seen, and I can tell you they're just absolutely excellent and they cover really important aspects of the topic. So the first question that we have is, why do we take water for granted? And let's answer it right off the top. Well, I think we take it for granted because, number one, it's abundant, Number two, it's free or almost free for most pork producers. And number three, it's convenient. So with so many things going on in the hog barn at any one time, there's so many things that are placing demands on people's time. Why would you spend time on something which is abundant, relatively inexpensive, and is convenient for the pigs to access? So I don't think it's surprising that we do kind of take it for granted. But let's just take a look at this slide to give us a bit of a sense of what's going on when it comes to water. And this is a fairly typical kind of a scene in the barn, certainly with younger pigs, although there's lots of different ways of delivering water to the pig. But if we take a look at this particular kind of water delivery system, and I think our last speaker, Nat, would tell us that the upper drinker is at about the right height, but you can see how much water is still being wasted. And in fact, a typical drinker of this structure is wasting at least 30% of the water that flows through it, meaning that of the water that flows through that nipple drinker, the pig's really only getting about 70% of it. Now, if you were wasting 30% of your feed, you'd probably be on it right away to stop it. If we were wasting 30% of our time, we'd be looking for ways of addressing that. But again, because water is abundant, relatively inexpensive, we're most likely to pay attention to something else. By the way, what else is in our lives, as well as the pigs' lives, that you can think of, which is abundant, free, and convenient? And we take it for granted even more, and that's air, right? It absolutely is required for life. In fact, we can't live very long without air, obviously, but we take it for granted too, because it's abundant, free, and convenient. But maybe I'd like to turn this question around a little bit and say, why should we not take water for granted? Well, number one, it's essential in the pig's diet. It's very, very important to the pig. There's a lot about water and water delivery to the pigs that we don't understand. Almost every function that goes on in the pig's body involves water one way or the other, directly or indirectly. And maybe the biggest one is that increasingly water is in short supply. Now, depending where you're located, but if you're here in the Midwest, generally speaking, it's relatively abundant. But for example, if we were in the Western United States, we know already there is conflict for water between urban centers, industry, and agriculture. And we know that water will become increasingly short supply as we go on. So for this reason alone, we should not take water for granted. So just to go over the outline of my presentation, I'm going to talk about the functions of water. I'm going to talk about the importance of water. I'm going to talk about water balance in finishing pigs and sows. I'm going to talk about the difference between water disappearance and water intake. And then I'm going to talk very briefly about the importance of water quality. So what are some of the functions of water? Well, it's a fairly lengthy list. Number one is to maintain constant body temperature. I think we're all aware that maintaining a constant body temperature is essential to us for life, because we get concerned when we have a fever. And if the fever becomes too great, if our body temperature rises too far, what happens is the proteins that are in our body start to change their structure, and they're no longer able to do their job. And if the temperature becomes too high and these proteins are affected too much, then that will result in death. And the same applies to maintaining constant acid-base balance. You would be surprised, I don't have the number at the tip of my tongue, but the amount of acid that is generated on a daily basis by normal metabolism. And the body has to get rid of that acid, but before it does so, it has to buffer it, because a change in pH of the body will also have an adverse effect on those same proteins. And therefore, if it changes too much, then it could result in death. And that's why the body will do everything in its power to maintain acid-base balance. We also have to maintain electrolyte balance. Those are things like sodium, potassium, magnesium. They have to stay in balance for proper movement, not only of nutrients, but also just of water between various compartments within the body. Water is involved in the movement of nutrients to the cells and waste from the cells and ultimately out of the body. Water is involved in lubrication. And in fact, it's a constituent of many, many chemical reactions. It's either being actually produced by some chemical reactions or it's being broken down by some chemical reactions. So water is really important, and it's pretty hard to think of very many functions in the body that do not involve water one way or another. So what do we know about water? What would I like to share with you? Well, we've talked a little bit about water and abundance, but 72% of the Earth's surface is covered with water. But you know what? 96.5% of that's salt water. So that doesn't help us very much. Another 2.5%, or only about 2.5%, is available as fresh water, but a lot of that is actually frozen in glaciers and ice caps. So in actual fact, less than 1% of the water on Earth is available for the purposes for which we need it. So therefore, there is plenty of water on Earth, but it's not necessarily in the forms that we need, fresh versus salt water, and obviously we need water that has not been polluted. So these are very important considerations when it comes to talking about water and abundance. Water is obviously essential for life. It's the only substance on Earth that occurs naturally as a solid, as a liquid, and a gas. You think of it, there's no other substance that occurs naturally in all three forms. And the chemistry of water, this is what really fascinates me. You can accuse me of being a geek on this, but water, the chemistry of water is almost ideally suited to its many functions. So let's talk about that. For example, water has a very high heat of vaporization, which means it requires a fair bit of energy to convert it from liquid to gas. And that's important to us because when we sweat, that's how we get rid of body heat. Pigs don't do that, but they can wallow. And the same principle applies. Energy is being taken from the body to convert that water to a gas. And the fact that that requires a fair bit of energy is favorable to us. Water also has a high specific heat, which is interesting. What that means is that within its liquid form, not talking about converting from liquid to gas, but when it's in its liquid form, it can absorb a large quantity of heat with a very small change in temperature. And that's really important because that means that when the body is trying to maintain a constant temperature, metabolism can be creating heat, but the water in the body helps to prevent the temperature of the body from changing too much. So here's a look at the specific heat of a number of common compounds, and you can see that water is way above all the other compounds. Alcohol has about half the specific heat of water. Wood is lower. Linseed oil and soybean meal are also oil, even gasoline. And we think of gasoline as being very combustible, but its specific heat is much lower than that of water. Water has a high surface tension, and that helps to support its role of moving nutrients and waste products through the vascular system. Interestingly, water has its maximum electrolyte activities. That is the maintenance of the electrolytes at 37 degrees, which happens to be very close to the temperature of the pig. And its natural pH, in its pure form, water has a pH of 7, which is very close to physiological pH. Therefore, that helps water contribute to our maintaining of a constant acid-base status. So you can see water has these chemical features of it, which makes it ideally suited for us to live and for the pigs to live. Now let's step back and take a look at typical water balance. And in this case, I'm using the example of a 100-pound pound pig, which growing normally, eating a corn soy diet. And we can see that 80% of the water that this pig receives on a daily basis comes from drinking. Well, that's no surprise. But what might be a surprise to you is that 16% of the water that pig has available for its use every day comes from metabolism. Those chemical reactions which are going on in the body continuously throughout the day and night is net releasing water. And that is available to the pig, just like drinking water is. And of course, there's a small amount of water that's shown in green here, which comes with the feed. Now, where does that water end up? Well, interestingly, this pig is drinking 1.5 gallons of feed, of water per day, but it's only retaining about 9% in its body as growth. 49% of the water leaves the pig as urine, and that's a very important process for the elimination of various waste materials and maintaining water balance. Another 35% is lost in respiration. And so there's a lot of water being eliminated in ways that we don't really see, but you see it in your barns in the wintertime because the moisture that's being expired by the pigs in its breath is what contributes to the moisture problems in your barn. It's not the only source of moisture in the air, of humidity, but it's one of the significant ones. And there's a little bit of water which is lost through the feces as well. So can we ask the question then, does the pig drink enough water to meet its requirement? In other words, if we have good quality water and we put it in front of the pig to allow it to drink as much water as it wants, we give it free access to water, will it drink as much water as it needs? In essence, that's what we're doing right now, right? We just put the water out there, let the pig choose how much it wants to drink. For the most part, some systems like liquid feeding systems control the amount of water that pigs are consuming. And probably in most situations, this ad libitum access to water is probably correct. But it may not be true in all circumstances. And I'm going to show you some examples of those in a minute. But the whole question of how much water does a pig need is a very difficult one. And that's why we really have not defined a requirement for water. The fact that a pig drinks a certain amount of water doesn't mean that it needs that much water. For example, pigs may underconsume water, but if we're measuring that in the pig, well, the kidneys to a certain extent can respond and conserve water, and therefore we think the pig is maintaining proper hydration, but in actual fact, it's not drinking enough water. But how would we know that? It's very, very hard to measure. We also know that the pig overconsumes water. We call that luxury consumption. We know that certain behaviors will induce overconsumptions. For example, if a pig is bored, the gestation sow in a gestation stall would be an example of that. If she's bored or pigs in a pen are bored, they will play with the waterers. There's also what's called hunger-induced overconsumption. We experience that in humans when we're not eating as much food as we would like to, i.e. we're on a diet. One of the recommendations is to drink more water to try to achieve a sense of satiety. It's controversial whether it accomplishes that or not, but the pig does the same thing. And again, looking at the gestation sow, she typically greatly overconsumes water because she's hungry because we're limit feeding her. And then we know that the pig wastes a lot of water. So when we measure water, are we measuring consumption or are we measuring disappearance? So disappearance is the amount of water that flows through the drinker. Consumption is the amount of water that actually enters the tummy of the pig. So let's take a look at an example here. So this is for flow rates for nipple drinkers. This work was done by Peter Brooks, who back in the 70s and 80s was a very prolific researcher on water, was probably the world's authority on water. And you can see the response to the different flow rates in the drinkers. You can see that as the flow rate increases, water disappearance goes up. We can see that feed intake was pretty much maximized around 1.9 cups per minute. Average daily gain was maximized at that same rate, which is not surprising if that's what maximizes feed intake. Feed conversion is maximized in that 1.5 to 1.9 cups per minute. But the amount of water that's required, and I'll explain that a little bit later on, stays fairly constant because we typically express the requirement that the pig has for water by its feed intake. So feed intake goes up, we're saying the pig needs more water. But take a look at the difference between water disappearance and water required and look at the wastage. So when we increase the delivery flow rate, we are increasing wastage. So in this case, and this would be about 450 or half a liter per minute flow rate for these pigs at 3 to 6 weeks of age. Let's take a look at the newly weaned pig. I find this pattern of water intake fascinating, and in every experiment we've done, this is what we've seen. That starting on the day of weaning and continuing on after that, for the first 2 or 3 or 4 days, water intake actually goes down in the little pig. Now, this is water intake. This does not include waste. This is actual intake. And then by about day 4, day 5, water intake starts to rise. Now, why would that be? What is driving that? Well, here's another experiment Monique Tremblay ran. This was done on a commercial farm. And again, we're looking at water intake. And we see the very same pattern of water intake starting high, declining, and by about day 5, it starts to increase, pretty much in line with the increase in feed intake. But look at the bottom graph where we can look at the scour score. And these pigs had significant diarrhea. They're represented by the square dots. And you'll notice that their water intake, number one, scouring was going up and water intake was going down, and that makes no sense at all, right? Because these pigs should have an increased need for water because of the diarrhea, and water intake is going down. And interestingly, even though these pigs had diarrhea, their water intake was only modestly higher than the pigs that didn't have diarrhea. So this is one of those situations where we really wonder in the newly weaned pig if water intake is matching physiological need. So in a very short period of time, I just want to explain that the water required by pigs, we represent or express per unit of feed, and we're saying about 2.6 liters of water per kilogram of feed for growing pigs and 2.3 kilograms for finishing pigs. But we know that's just a rough guide. That can be affected by environmental temperature. It can be affected by the health status of the pigs. It can be affected by the composition of the feed. So there's many things that will cause it to vary from that, but that's at least a starting point. Let's take a look at water balance in the sow. And here we can see this sow, she's nursing 12 piglets, and she's drinking over 6 gallons of water a day. A lot of water. 87% of her water intake is coming from drinking water. 10% is coming from the metabolism that we talked about before. But look that 39% of that water is leaving the sow as urine. Only 8% is leaving as respiration, but milk takes the bulk of that. This sow is producing a lot of milk. And so obviously she needs a lot of water because milk is 85% water. So when we're thinking of water intake, the sow and the newly weaned pig are the two stages of production, we might say, where we should be paying a lot of attention so we know those pigs are getting the water that they require. Continuing on with this, here is some work done by Dave Fraser, quite a few years ago, very intensive work, very difficult work. And he shows that the sows that had the greatest amount of activity in the first 3 days after farrowing drank the most water. Or conversely, typically the sows that were not very active drank the least amount of water. Well, we can surmise why that's bad, but here's some other data from Dave where he's showing in day 1 to 3 again, he's looking at sow water intake and piglet weight gain. And there's a pretty strong correlation there that the more water that the sow drinks, the greater will be the growth rate in her piglets. And the slow growing pigs are associated with sows that aren't drinking very much. Now, when we get to the second week after farrowing, that relationship isn't quite as strong, but we still see that the slowest growing pigs are associated with sows that are in the bottom half of water intake. Now, the question that we have is the sow drinking less water because the pigs aren't drinking much milk and therefore they don't need to produce as much milk and therefore don't need the water? Or are the piglets, and so is it due to the piglet performance, or is the sow not drinking much water, therefore she's not producing much milk, and therefore the piglets aren't able to grow very fast? And unfortunately, we don't have a good answer to that. So I'd like to finish now by just referring you to one study that we did a number of years ago on a 1,200 sow fair to finish farm. They had terrible quality, what we would consider terrible quality water, over 3,000 parts per million of total dissolved solids, over 1,600 parts per million of sulfates, and they were very concerned about their water. They were so concerned that they invested over $300,000 in a reverse osmosis unit, because reverse osmosis is really the only way to remove sulfates from the water. So we took advantage of this great opportunity and ran a comparison, giving half of the pigs at weaning water straight from the well, and half the pigs got water that had gone through reverse osmosis. And as you go down the data, you can see that there's absolutely nothing there that's going to make you think that the pigs drinking that water with over 1,600 parts per million of sulfate are performing any more poorly than the pigs that are getting relatively pure water. Very, very fascinating. In fact, it was such a surprise to the barn workers, they didn't believe it. And you can't blame them, because these pigs that were on raw water had a lot of diarrhea, and so they weren't looking very good. And so we reran the trial and got exactly the same results. So the moral of the story is pigs can handle higher levels of sulfate than we think. That doesn't mean to say water quality isn't important, because it is. And that doesn't mean to say that sulfate doesn't cause problems, that it does. But in terms of animal performance, in terms of weanling pigs, they seem to have a better capability than we previously thought. Now, having said that, the one thing we don't know is, do pigs that have diarrhea like this, are they more susceptible to pathogens that that attack the gastrointestinal tract? Because they have this, what we call an osmotic diarrhea, are they more susceptible to pathogens that can make them sick? And I don't believe that experiment has ever been run. So in summary then, I think we can agree that water is just too easy to take for granted. But that doesn't mean that we should take it for granted for reasons that we discussed. Water is involved in most functions in the body, and that means that water is very, very important. Just because the pig drinks it, we don't see it beyond that, doesn't mean it's not active. It's very, very active in the body. It's extremely difficult to define the pig's requirement for water because it's affected by so many things. So for the most part, we really haven't measured it. I gave you a guideline that we use, but hopefully you appreciated the cost that they gave you, that there's lots of variation about those typical levels. Simply making water available to the pig might work most of the time, but there's periods in the pig's life, notably in early lactation and right after weaning, where that may not be sufficient. And finally, water could become an increasingly limited resource in this country as time goes by, because there's more and more pressure on our available water supply. So thank you very much for your attention. It's been my pleasure. Really appreciate having been here, and I believe we'll be taking questions at the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Patient, for such important contribution to the topic of water. I'm sure that many of our listeners were able to capture the important physiological, metabolic, and basic aspects of water in nutrition. And hopefully they will be able to, in the future, answer what does a camel carry in the hump. Next, we have a great presentation too from Brigit Lozinski. Brigit is a master's student at the University of Minnesota in St. Paul, Minnesota. The title of Brigit's presentation is Investigating Available Water Use for Nursery Pigs in Minnesota. And the specific objective of this presentation is to present an important research project on the impact of water quality on the growth performance of nursery pigs. Without further ado, please, Brigit.
Thank you for that introduction this morning. Today I'll be discussing with you a little bit of my master's project where we investigated the available water used for nursery pigs in the state of Minnesota. So recently, pork producers have observed some problems in seeing poor performance in the nursery phase, seeing pigs that are falling behind, scouring, and just harder to start on feed after that weaning event. These producers have considered many different areas of their production systems to try and understand what might be causing this decrease in performance. They looked at things like nutrition and genetics, environment, management protocols, and so on, and decided that these areas were not the problem and thought that maybe instead this could be related to water quality. The first thought in this process was, well, what is water quality? What is acceptable water quality for the pig and their health and for optimal performance in those pig barns? Well, from looking at the literature, the standard definition of water quality seemed to be rather broad and unclear. However, it consistently included statements that talked about chemical composition and bacterial contamination, though there's really not a lot of scientific publications that look at water quality as related to the pig. Of that published literature available that we found, a majority of the studies done really only evaluated individual components of the water in isolation and seem to mostly focus on total dissolved solids, sulfates, bacteria, and pH. So the question here became, is there one single analyte that we should be focused on in pigs? Are there multiple analytes? Do they interact in some way? And how does that impact the pig? And simply put, the answer is that we just don't know at this point. So determining whether water quality is considered good or bad for the pig is something that is also hard to put together due to that limited amount of research available. So for example, in this table, we have a snapshot of 2 different nursery barns that we sampled from the wellhead in the state of Minnesota. We see here that barn 2 is low in sulfates, total dissolved solids, and hardness when compared to barn 1. So one might consider barn 2 to be of good quality for the pig. The owner of barn 2 had also indicated that they felt the barn had good water based on their perception. Further, the owner of barn 1 had felt they had very poor water quality. So that further kind of goes to show that one might consider barn 2 to be of good quality for the pig. However, when we look at the recommended levels we have listed in this column here, we notice that neither of the farms exceed any of the recommended levels for any of the analytes, except a slight overage in Farm 1 for sulfates. So now we wonder if Farm 1's water is even really considered to be that bad. Right now, many producers and scientists refer to the 2016 PIC water quality standards in the PIC manual, since it's a newer publication and pretty readily available to us. However, we recognize that this manual is derived from the 1987 CCME publication and the 2012 NRC, noting that the 2012 NRC further relates back to the 1974 NRC manual. With that, our standards are over 45 years old, and with industry advances, we start to think about if those standards are still applicable to modern pig production. However, we really don't know, but these are the best guides that we have to answer our questions thus far. Therefore, we set out with the objective to determine if waters of differing qualities would have an impact on growth, performance, and health of nursery pigs, and we hypothesized that we would observe some sort of difference in these different water qualities. To do this, we set up a 3-part experiment. Phase 1 consisted of a survey that we sent out to Minnesota pork producers to gain understanding of how they perceive the water quality within their nursery barns. We then took those results and identified 15 farms that we would be able to obtain water from. And then we traveled to each of those farms to collect a water sample, and those samples were sent to a commercial lab and analyzed for 29 different analytes. We then compiled all the results from the lab into a large database. And after consulting with our research team and some input from the industry professionals who work with swine water quality about their experiences and what they thought about the waters we had sampled, we were able to select 3 farms to participate in a pig experiment. So of the 15 farms that were sampled, we selected waters A, B, and C as our experimental treatments because we perceived that waters A and B would be of poor quality due to the high levels of sulfates and total dissolved solids when compared to water C. So one way to identify the differences in performance and health of different water qualities would be to measure pig performance and health at each of the farms that these waters came from. But we know that there are a lot of other things that differ on each of these farms besides the water, such as management protocols, genetics, health, and so on. So seeing that, and to best carry out this study, what we chose to do is collect all 3 of these waters and actually bring them to a central location to control for as many of those differing factors that you would see in the commercial industry as we possibly could. So in order to do that, we had to come up with a new system to install to the nursery barn at the West Central Research and Outreach Center in Morris, capable of delivering all 3 of these waters to different pens of pigs. So what we did here is we installed a new pressurized water system that utilized 3 2,500-gallon potable water bladders that we stored on a platform outside of the nursery barn underneath a shade cloth. So in this picture here, you can see a fully collapsed water bladder and then a water bladder that has some water in it. So just for some comparison. New water lines and manifolds were also installed, and they were capable of delivering any of the 3 water treatments to each set of 2 pens in the nursery barn. As you can see in this picture on the right, the manifold drops down and delivers to 2 pens. And in this picture on the left, you can see that there are 3 separate water lines coming down from the ceiling, controlled by valves that allowed us to turn on or off a specific water treatment. Further, we descaled and cleaned all of the standpipes that are in the pens and installed new water drinker nipples in each of the water cups and adjusted them so that we could ensure a flow of 0.5 liter per minute. To then test our hypothesis, we began a 40-day experiment that utilized 2 identical nursery rooms. We had 45 pens on test total, with 15 pens per treatment that had 10 pigs in each pen, averaging 20 days of age with an initial body weight of 6.24 kilograms. All pigs were sourced from a single healthy commercial sow farm located in south central Minnesota and were from a PERS and myco-negative flow and sow barn. All pigs had ad libitum access to feed and water throughout the duration of the study and were given the same diets through an industry-relevant 4-phase feeding program. We recorded growth performance by individual body weights and feed intake on a pen basis weekly. We also measured diet digestibility by pooling fecal grab samples of 2 random pigs per pen on days 10 to 12 and analyzing for dry matter, crude protein, and gross energy by utilizing titanium dioxide as an indigestible marker in the phase 2 diet. To assess health, we did a few different things. One being a cytokine analysis, where we collected a blood sample from 1 random pig per pen on day 8 of the experiment. And further looking at immune function, we used a phago test to analyze the phagocytic activity, also with 1 blood sample from 1 random pig per pen on day 11 of the experiment. And lastly, we recorded any instances of morbidity and mortality for the entire duration of the study. All data were analyzed using the procglymics function of SAS 9.4, where treatment was held as a fixed effect and pen as a random effect. And all data will be reported as least square means, plus or minus the standard error, and we have deemed significance at a p-value of less than 0.05. Now we'll move into some of the results of the study. If you recall, we selected waters A and B with the perception that those waters would be of poor quality, and water C with the intention that it was of good quality. Thus, we would expect some difference in growth performance if water quality had an impact on the pig performance. However, when we start to consider overall performance, we notice that in terms of average daily gain and average daily feed intake for the overall for the entire experiment, there were no observed differences in the growth of the pigs. Understanding that and seeing that, it is not surprising to us that when we look at the gain efficiency, there's also no differences among the treatments. Looking at digestibility in terms of dry matter and crude protein and gross energy, there was no influence of water quality on the digestibility of the diet, which would make sense thinking back to our performance results of the study. Thinking back to gain efficiency, and this further supports the lack of difference seen here from the previous performance slide. So remember that we also needed to consider the health of the pigs when thinking about water quality. So one way we did that was by looking at the cytokine concentrations of the pig. Here in this graph, we have 5 of the many cytokines that we measured in a stacked bar graph. So for instance, we see that for IL-1 beta, there is no difference in the size of each of the bars, indicating that there's no significant difference in the concentration of cytokines. This same thing is observed when we look at IL-1 alpha, interleukin 6 and 8, and TNF alpha. So we also decided to do a phago test, and this was a new and interesting test that we decided to do purely to just gain some experience and learn. The purpose here with the phago test is to measure the overall percentages of both monocytes and granulocytes that show phagocytosis in general, and then also the individual cellular phagocytic activity shown by those pigs. So to understand these values in the table, looking at water A, we see a 70%, and that just means that 70% of the total monocytes were showing phagocytosis, and 95% of the total granulocytes showed phagocytosis. However, among treatments, again, there were no differences in either total monocytes or granulocytes for waters A, B, and C throughout the study. This result also fits well with our cytokine concentration results on the previous slide, meaning that the pigs on test did not differ in immune status, and their immune systems seemed to be functioning pretty similarly. Further, this fits well with our mortality and morbidity, as there were no notable differences among treatments in the number of pigs treated or the number of injections given. Regarding mortality, keeping in mind that we had a total of 450 pigs on test, the two mortalities, which we did postmortem examinations and found that they were not related to the water quality, resulted in a 0.44% mortality rate for the entire experiment, thus further confirming the high health status of these pigs that we had on test. So to conclude, from our investigation of water quality in some of the nurseries in the state of Minnesota, we found that there were no differences in pig growth, performance, and health based on the qualities of water that we used in this study. We recognize that there are a lot more than 15 nursery barns throughout the state of Minnesota, and while we may have felt that some of the water we analyzed was of poor quality, and producers had perceived that water of poor quality, there may be worse water out there that could exceed the standard suggestions that we earlier talked about. While water did not seem to make a difference in our study, we realized that our study may not be directly related to what is seen in the industry, as we chose to control this study as much as possible and truly just test the water quality itself. So our water samples were taken from the wellhead, which may not be representative of the water that the pigs drink in the barns that we tested, due to buildup in the water lines of biofilm that we can kind of see the difference in here. On the left side, we have a standpipe that obviously has not been cleaned out. And this is just some buildup over 8 years that we had seen. And then on the right side is after that standpipe had been cleaned out. And we also note that we installed new water lines for our study, so there was no buildup in those lines to begin with. Also, the pigs that we had on test were very healthy throughout the duration of the study. So one question that we kind of started to think about towards the end was if a compromised health and immune system within a pig might react differently to different water qualities. And finally, we know that things such as environment management, genetics, other management protocols, and a plethora of other things do vary from barn to barn and production system to system out in the field. And these things may also contribute to the impact of water quality on nursery pigs. So further investigations should be done to better understand which analytes and combinations of analytes are of priority to the pig, and also if our current references of water quality suggestions are still relevant to modern pigs in production systems. Finally, I would really like to thank both Christensen Farms and the Minnesota Pork Board for their funding efforts in this study, and all of the students and staff at the WCROC up in Morris, Minnesota, for all of their time and assistance in the barn. And thank you all for tuning in today.
Thanks, Brigit, for such meaningful presentation. We understand now what is that impact of water on performance of pigs under these experimental conditions. And it's a good way to assess the impact of the different range of water quality on performance of pigs in Minnesota. Moving from our state of Minnesota, and given that the Lehman Conference is a global conference, a conference that has always tried to bring information from all over the world, today we have a great contribution from another latitude, all the way from Australia, Dr. Steve Little. Steve is a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Veterinary and Agricultural Sciences and the National Centre for Antimicrobial Stewardship at the University of Melbourne in Australia. The title of this presentation is Water Medication of Growing Pigs, Sources of Between Animal Variability in Systemic Exposure to Antimicrobials. Steve, please, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, I'm very pleased to be part of this workshop on water, and I want to thank the conference organisers for the opportunity. As well as being a nutrient for pigs, water is a vehicle that we can use to administer antimicrobials to pigs to manage their health, welfare and productivity. And in this presentation, I'll explore some of the challenges with water medication, drawing on my research at the University of Melbourne in Australia. Okay, so let's get into it. So as you well know, pigs are vulnerable to a whole series of bacterial infections as they grow through the weaner, grower, finisher phase. And there are two ways in which we can medicate pigs through the drinking water system. We can either directly dose them by using large header tanks as the source of water during a dosing event, or as many are doing, many farms are doing, we'll use a proportional dosing pump. And what that involves, for those who aren't familiar with that, is we prepare a highly concentrated stock solution of the antimicrobial, and then that is drawn up by the pump and injected into the water line at a specific ratio. For example, 1 part per 100 by volume, or perhaps 1 by 50. That can vary. So water medication's very well suited for control and treatment of bacterial infections, mainly because it's so flexible. Right up to the last minute, we can decide exactly what the dosing regimen is going to be and how many consecutive days we dose the pigs for. Whereas when we're medicating through feed, it takes a lot of planning and logistics to make that happen. So when we talk about control, or metaphylaxis, as we sometimes call it, we're really talking about the early stages of disease where the bacterial load in the building is still low. At that point, we can achieve 100% clinical cure rate with a much lower dose of antimicrobial than we would need to get on top of a disease outbreak and treat a disease outbreak later in the course of the disease. And the other good thing about getting in there early and controlling rather than treating is that we reduce the pressure for selection of resistant pathogens. Now, if we are faced with an outbreak, water medication gives us the opportunity to rapidly respond, and we can even target specific groups of pigs within a building if we wish. And knowing that even if some of the pigs are their appetites for feed are suppressed, we know that they'll still be drinking. So the final point here is, which I think is a really important one, is unlike feed medication, water medication directly involves not just the veterinarian, but also the farm manager and staff on the farm. And it really just keeps pig health very visible and in front of everyone all the time, so that we're always asking ourselves, are we doing the right thing at the right time? Okay, so successful water medication of pigs, it's not just about not having any clinical signs of disease in the pigs. It's also about the pathogen being eliminated, or at least the numbers being drastically reduced. It's also about having minimal selection and propagation of resistant pathogens. So really, success is determined by the systemic exposure to the antimicrobial that we achieve in each pig during and after dosing. In other words, the concentration of antimicrobial that's achieved over time in the pig's plasma, or whatever the target organ might be. And because antimicrobials differ in their inhibitory actions, they differ in terms of the pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic index, which best predicts that antimicrobial's efficacy against a particular pathogen. So if we look at this chart I've got here, we've got on the horizontal axis time post-administration, and on the vertical axis plasma concentration of the antimicrobial. So you can see for a concentration-dependent antimicrobial, it's how high this peak is, so Cmax divided by the minimum inhibitory concentration. That's the concentration of antimicrobial that kills the pathogen. So that's the important index that we use. In contrast, for a time-dependent antimicrobial, for example, amoxicillin, it's what's most important is what's the time above MIC within any 24-hour period. And there are other antimicrobials like tetracycline that are codependent, both concentration and time, and for them the most useful index for us to measure is the area under the curve divided by the MIC. So at a group level, our aim is for at least 90% of the pigs to attain a given target for the appropriate pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic index for the particular antimicrobial pathogen combination that we're concerned with. So my research at the University of Melbourne is focused on understanding the sources of between animal variability and systemic exposure to antimicrobials administered through the water under commercial farm conditions. So these are the three main sources. Firstly, variability in the concentrations of antimicrobial in the water at the drinkers in each pen over time. And secondly, the patterns of consumption of the medicated water by the pigs in each pen over time. And then thirdly, the pharmacokinetics within each pig. So the absorption and distribution and clearance of the antimicrobial within the pigs. So they're the three main sources of between animal variability, which contribute to the extent to which a dosing event is successful on a given farm. So let's just go through a few aspects of each of these. Firstly, variability in the concentration of antimicrobial in the water at drinkers in each pen over time. And really the solubility of the antimicrobial product is absolutely critical to success because we need the product, the active, to remain in solution for the entire dosing event. And not only that, solubility is also important for it contributes to the absorption and distribution of the antimicrobial within each pig. Now, when we're using proportional dosing pumps, we're using high concentration stock solutions. And that does present some challenges when we choose to use less soluble antimicrobials like amoxicillin trihydrate and like chlortetracycline hydrochloride. So just to show you, just to illustrate this point, here we have mixed up some stock solutions of amoxicillin, chlortetracycline, and lincomycin suitable for injection into the waterline at a ratio of 1 part per 100. And you can see that whilst the lincomycin is beautifully dissolved, and after 24 hours in pure water, it's still beautifully, perfectly dissolved. But you can see that the amoxicillin and the chlortetracycline haven't dissolved entirely, and after 24 hours we've got a lot of undissolved particles in the bottom of these beakers. So the injection ratios at which solubility is exceeded for a product like amoxicillin and chlorotetracycline are quite high. So we have to go to means, fair and foul to help these get these products through the system. So, for example, with amoxicillin, we would typically use soda ash, sodium carbonate, to lift the pH of the stock solution, and that has a real benefit in terms of helping the product dissolve. And maintaining the product in solution throughout the dosing events really going to also depend on things like the water quality. It's going to depend on the extent to which we're agitating the solution in the stock solution container, and if there's any other interactions going on in the water as well. Okay, so let's now move on to another really important aspect of this first source of variability, and that's thinking about the passage of this antimicrobial product through the drinking water distribution system to the buildings and then within each building. So there are two main types of water pipelines on pig sheds, pig buildings. They can be either looped or they can be branched. Looped pipelines have advantages. Although they cost more to install, they're more reliable because the water, when the water enters the building, it flows in two directions rather than just one. They're easier to maintain, and the pressure losses along the pipes are less. Now we get pressure losses in any piped water distribution system. It's a function of how long the pipes are, what diameter they are, how rough the internal surface of the pipes are, and how many fittings that we install along the pipe that will expansions, restrictions, bends, etc., which disrupt water flow. So loop systems are I think in many piggeries are moving towards looped systems. So what I want to show you is a study in grower sheds that I've been doing on a commercial farm to explore the passage of antimicrobial product through a single looped water pipeline. So this is a large grower shed. And let's have a look here. We've got the dosing pump. This is where the water enters the shed, the building. We've got the dosing pump here on the side, and then we've got entry into our loop, and we've got two main arms to our loop. And what I've done in these studies is over every 10, 15, 20 minutes, I've collected water samples from 4 points in the shed. And then I've analysed those for the antimicrobial using UV absorbance. I've also used a fluorescent tracer dye called rhodamine WT to give me another opportunity to look at how water flows from the dosing pump past each of these pens and over time. So really, of course, we're interested in what level of antimicrobial, what concentration we achieve over time at each of these points in the building, but particularly interested in the lags, the time between when the antimicrobial is injected into the water line from the dosing pump, the lag between that time and the time at which the antimicrobial flows to and past each of these pens. So why is the lag important? Well, the lag's important because the hourly water usage of pigs is not constant. I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. It's not constant hour by hour. So if we have long lags, then potentially pigs can have quite a different pattern of ingestion of antimicrobial, and I'll show you an example of that shortly. So just bear with me now as I show you what we've done here. This was the initial design of the shed, and this is what we did when we used amoxicillin as our example antimicrobial. And you can see, and this might surprise you, rather than the water flowing up both arms, what we found was that in actual fact the water was flowing in one direction largely, in a clockwise direction. And so you can see here I've color coded the 4 drinkers pens that I've sampled the water from. You can see that water very quickly reaches L2, then rather quickly reaches L3, and then there's this long interval until it comes around to L4, and L5 is in fact the last of these 4 test pens to first see the antimicrobial. And you can see a similar pattern with the rhodamine tracer dye, so confirming that this is the flow that's happening. Okay, so what we've done is we asked ourselves, how can we reduce the lag? So I want to just show you 3 things that we tried. First thing was to disrupt this this one-way flow by actually installing a circulator pump at this point in the loop, so that we would actually pull the more water across into this further arm of the loop. Now, so the pump was turned on just before the beginning of the dosing event, and you can see for the first 2 hours it really didn't have much of an influence. So we saw a very similar lags to what we saw in the previous study, but from that point on you can see that it has actually reduced the fluctuations in the middle of the dosing event, and then you can see that as the rhodamine was introduced, we've got this sort of more gentle slope, and we've virtually eliminated all the lags, because all these points are pretty much on top of each other. And the reason for that is that this pump is now pulling this water through, and it's going in a anti-clockwise direction at quite high velocity. So the antimicrobial that's being injected by the dosing pump into the waterline is getting diluted effectively through the whole volume of water in this pipe system, which when you work it out, this shed had nearly 500 litres of water held up in this looped system at any one time. So that's our second study. Now, what we then did was we said, okay, let's move the dosing pump from its position here. It's obviously not balanced leaving it there. Let's put it in a central position, and then this is the point at which the water is entering the loop. And then so we now expect the water to flow in either direction from this point around the loop. So we've moved the position of our 4 test drinkers, and this is what we found. Yes, you can see that this is the way the water's flowing. So we've got L2 and L3 here, and then we've got a considerable interval before water finds its way around to L4 and around to L5. So you can see the lags for these near pens are about 1 hour, and the lags for the pens here, L4 and L5, are about 2.5 to 3 hours. So quite long lags, reflective of their distance from the dosing pump and the velocity of the water. And we found a similar pattern when we put the rhodamine into the stock solution halfway through the dosing event. So this isn't ideal. So we made one more change. We actually split the single loop into 2 smaller loops. Okay, you can see that. And this is what we found. We had a longer lag than we did before, but the difference between the lags for the near pens and the far pens is reduced. So that's positive, and we saw the same pattern with the rhodamine. So this is the best of the four designs of this particular looped water pipeline system that we've found. There are further improvements that we could also make, but that's certainly the best of the four. Okay, so yeah, how the product flows through the system is really important, and I'll reinforce that point shortly. Let's move on to the second source of variability, and that's variability in the water consumption pattern of the pigs during the dosing event. So here's an example that Sunport provided me of the water usage pattern of a large controlled environment building housing weaner pigs of 8 kilos body weight. And you can see clearly we've got two peaks here. We've got one in the morning and a larger peak in the early afternoon period. So interesting to see that pattern even in a shed where the temperature is constant and where the lighting pattern is pretty much constant as well. Now, of course, we might need to make the distinction between water usage and water consumption, because we know that pigs waste a certain proportion of the water that they're offered. So if we were to assume a 30% wastage rate, then the bars in blue will show you exactly what the pigs actually consumed. Now, of course, probably a little unrealistic to assume that water wastage is constant hour by hour. It may well, this might be perhaps more realistic, although I don't have any data to show you on this today. Here we have a pattern where wastage during the night hours is relatively low, but in the early mid-afternoon it's much higher. That's possibly more realistic. Okay, and then the third source of variability in the systemic exposure of pigs to the antimicrobial is the pharmacokinetics. So the most important aspect of this really is how bioavailable the antimicrobial is. And with products like oxytetracycline, chlortetracycline and amoxicillin, they've got very low oral bioavailability, and they're the ones where we expect high variability in exposure, as opposed to products like sulfadiazine trimethoprim that have got high oral bioavailabilities. There are other factors that can contribute to variability in the pharmacokinetics, whether the pigs have or have not do have disease. So that's our third source of variability. Right, now, so I just want to show you, just thinking about successful water medication of pigs. Let's just go through a comparison here of 3 alternative dosing regimens, A, B and C, that are aimed at delivering 20 milligrams per kilogram of amoxicillin to those 8 kilo pigs we were talking about before. In other words, we're trying to administer 160 milligrams to them in this dosing event. So dosing regimen A, as you can see here, starts at 12 noon, goes for 8 hours. Dosing regimen B is also 8 hours, but starts at 7 a.m. We're going to use the same just to keep things simple, going to use the same concentration of amoxicillin in the water, 0.25 milligrams per mil, and we're going to assume that that's constant throughout the dosing event, but we're going to apply that to this water consumption pattern. And then the third dosing regimen, C, is conducted over 24 hours. So with dosing regimen A, what I'm interested in is what is the antimicrobial ingestion pattern for pigs that get the antimicrobial immediately, those that have a lag of 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, as we talked about previously. So this is the 8-hour window, if you like, for the pigs. If you just look at this window here, that's for 0 lag, that's for a 1 hour lag, that's for a 2 hour lag, and that's for a 3 hour lag. So you can see that the pigs that have the 3-hour lag are now in a period of the day where the water consumption is much lower than it was for the first pigs without the lag, and this is reflected in the quantity of antimicrobial that's ingested over the 8 hours of exposure. But the other interesting thing to read from this chart here is that none of the pigs got anywhere near the target 160 milligrams per kilogram dose, 160 milligrams that we were after. So that's dosing regimen A. Let's now look at what it looks like if we dose at 7 a.m. in the morning with exactly the same concentration of oxacillin in the water. This is, oops, sorry, we'll go back here. This is what happens. So pretty much all the pigs get very close to the target of 160 milligrams ingested in total over the 8 hours that they're exposed to the antibiotic, the antimicrobial. You can see there are some differences in hour-to-hour exposure and ingestion, but much closer than with starting the dose at 12 noon and a completely different endpoint, even though the concentration is the same. So let's go to dosing regimen C now, the 24-hour dosing regimen. And look, no surprises here. They all achieve 160 milligram in ingestion, basically because regardless of the lags that each pig has gone all the way through this 24-hour water consumption pattern. But again, there's slight differences in terms of how they get there hour by hour. So yeah, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that if there are substantial lags in water flow during if we choose to dose over a shorter period, which many farms do, then the start time can have a very large impact on the dose ingested by pigs around a building if there are substantial lags due to the design of the water pipeline. So as we've shown here, again with dosing regimen A starting at 12 noon, this is our start time, and this is the total amount of antimicrobial ingested over that 8-hour event. So this is effectively the end point here for dosing regimen A with our lags, 0, 1, 2 and 3 hours. Very little difference here for at 7 a.m, but you can see that if we were to commence dosing, not that we would earlier in the morning, we'd then be exposed to a lot of variability there, and similarly all the way through the evening. It's only at this point at 7 p.m. that we reduce that variability, but problem there is we would need to use a much higher concentration of antimicrobial to deliver our 160 milligrams. Right, so I just want to finish by just thinking through for a moment or two what's best practice when it comes to water medicating growing pigs for control, i.e. for metaphylaxis. And I've broken this into three parts. So firstly, let's think about the water distribution system, the pipeline within a given building. We need to optimize the design of the water pipeline. And I've shown you how big an impact that can have on the performance of a dosing event. We also obviously need to optimize number that we have in each pen, the position, the height, and so forth. We need to maintain those pipelines and drinkers. We need to be monitoring and maintaining adequate flow rates at drinkers throughout the shed. And we need to be testing the quality of the drinking water on a regular basis as well. Now, when it comes to the dosing itself, one of the obvious considerations is we need to choose the most appropriate antimicrobial and the most appropriate dose, be that for control or treatment. So we're looking for an antimicrobial that to which the pathogen is sensitive, and we're also should be consciously choosing, if possible, an antimicrobial that's of low importance from a human medicine point of view, so that we're not contributing to this whole global antimicrobial resistance crisis that we find ourselves in around the world. Calculating an accurate dose, well, yeah, that's pretty obvious. So we need to know exactly what our pig numbers and our body weights are. And as I've illustrated, we need to set the start time and the duration of the dosing event based on the pig's drinking pattern, hour by hour. And if we are going to use a proportional dosing pump, we need to use one that's got the required capacity for the size of the building, the number of pigs, and the water flow rates that are going to be required. We need a pump that's reliable and accurate, and that comes down to its design and its maintenance. We need to use the highest injection ratio that we can, and what I mean by that is, if we can, it's preferable to use a 1 in 50 rather than a 1 in 100 or 1 in 200, because that just means we're not pushing the limits of the antimicrobial in terms of its inherent solubility. And for those products that are not perfectly soluble, then using a magnetic stirrer or a submersible pump to keep agitating the stock solution during the dosing event is certainly best practice as well. So hopefully, perhaps in the Q&A, we might perhaps expand on one or two of those points that I've got there. But we could talk for a long time on any of those. So I just want to finish by acknowledging my supervisors at the University of Melbourne, all the pig producers and veterinarians in Australia that have been helping me with my research. I particularly want to thank Riverley Australia for their assistance, and also Sunpork, and also my funders. And I just want to finish by really inviting you to perhaps get in contact with me if you want, and I'd love to hear from you and chat with you about your experiences with water medicating pigs, what you've learned about different water pipeline designs and the use of dosing pumps and header tanks, water usage patterns of pigs and different dosing regimens. So yeah, please don't hesitate to contact me after the conference. Shoot me an email, or if you like, and you can work out the time differences between where you are and where I am. I'm on Melbourne time, but feel free to give me a call. So, and I just want to finish by thanking you for your attention. I hope you've found that useful and thought-provoking. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve, for such important contribution. And it's really relevant and visual on how uses in many ways that we lose activity or the effectiveness of the products that we use when we try to medicate through water. Thank you for such important contribution. Now, you listeners can apply this information and see how you can have more effective medication, or how can you think of more effective medication. Well, finally, we have the last presentation for this morning from Nat Stats. Nat is a technical service specialist and technical service weaned to finish at the Pig Improvement Company in Hendersonville, Tennessee. And Nat title's presentation is Managing Water to Maximize Performance. And with Nat, you will see very applied recommendations on the delivery of water. And I hope that you see that he has brought very useful information for you today. Nat?
Okay, well, today I'm going to be talking about managing water to maximize performance, and I just want to thank Pedro and committee for the invitation to go ahead and do this. As he probably alluded to, I work with PIC, and I'm on their wean to finish technical service team. So I spend a lot of time out in the field with producers, and what my focus is kind of going to be here today is, what are some of those practical things we can do, at middle management and slat level to make sure we have enough water availability for the pigs so they can perform well and grow well. And then also some of the basic day-to-day operational things that we can do to troubleshoot and make sure we continually have water available to those pigs. So as I go through these slides, you're going to see it's going to kind of start off as some key driver areas. We're going to discuss some interaction areas as well that can influence the water needs and water availability as well. And then I'm going to kind of wrap it up with some troubleshooting information and leave you with just some thoughts for the future, some possibly research initiatives or updates in research that we need to see, and then some of the stuff that maybe is on the horizon that we can see coming down the road. We can start to form some recommendations and requirements around that. So first and foremost, I obviously wanted to just discuss why water is important. Obviously, it's often discussed as the most forgotten nutrient, and it's definitely a very essential nutrient. We went through some periods of time here recently where, some pigs were euthanized and things like that. And I think about how quickly could we euthanize pigs, and beyond air, water is probably the second, one of the second quickest ways to go about that. If we don't have water, or a pig doesn't have water for a short period of time, it's going to definitely affect them in a negative way. So we want to make sure that we ensure water availability. And then from an environmental perspective, we need to be stewards of the land. It's a limited resource. It's not different parts of the world and different parts of North America. It's not as readily available as others. And so it's considered a limited vital resource. So we want to maximize that water use. We don't want it to all go in the pit because there's obviously negative consequences with that, with pit management and pit capacity. But then also, if we're going to spend money and resources on that water to provide that to the pigs, that's ultimately where we want to get it to, so they could use that water to then eat, feed, and then ultimately grow. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on this slide because I think it's a really important slide to kind of set us up as we dive down through this presentation. This is a piece of the puzzle as far as our growing pig excellence team that put this together. As you see some of those names listed below there. And it's a lot of the factors that go into the roadmap of just wean to finish production and growing pigs for ultimately pork consumption. And so it's not as simple as just getting water in front of the pig. There's a lot of different factors that go into that that's going to ultimately lead to that maximizing pig performance. So we see here on the right some of those key drivers. Some of those key drivers include drinker position, drinker design, so bull water, swing, fixed style waters, the water flow rate, so how fast water comes out of that nipple or bowl, water quality, we'll touch on that later on, and then drinker availability, or how many drinkers there are in a pen, or how many pigs per single drinker there is. And then within that, you have drinker height as well, and we'll discuss all those factors. Secondary to that, we're going to talk about some of the interactions that are going to have an effect on some of those key drivers. So things such as floor space, per pig, floor type, feeder design is going to make a difference. We're seeing more and more wet dry feeders in the North American industry. And the environmental components, so heat stress or humidity effect on pigs. Obviously, the health status is a huge component within this. There's a lot of veterinarians across this landscape that try to use that as an indicator to predict health outbreaks, or when a health outbreak's happening, and so they can intervene and get those pigs treated. And then ultimately feed intake as well. We'll talk a lot about water to feed ratio and what that means, and if we better understand that, how we can use that as a predictor throughout this process. So I'm going to kind of start and leave you with a similar slide as you'll see, but I wanted to just touch on, if you go to our Wean to Finish manual that's located on our pic.com website, you'll find a lot of these recommendations, but I wanted to just include these first and foremost here in the slide set. So we recommend 1 drinker per 10 to 12 pigs, and we'll discuss the data and the reasoning behind that here later on in consecutive slides. We'll discuss what's the ideal height, and it's dependent on that water design or water style that we're using. With a bull, it's going to be 40% of the smallest pig in that, or the shoulder level of the smallest pig in that pen. If we have a 60-degree angled nipple, then it's going to be 2 to 3 degrees or 2 to 3 inches above the shoulder height of that pig. We're going to talk about water flow as well. For nursery, we recommend 0.5 liter per minute or 500 milliliters per minute, and then 1 liter per minute in finishing or wean to finish. Now, obviously, with wean to finish, you have kind of nursery phase pigs and grow finish phase pigs at different stages of growth. It's just easier if we keep that constant 1 liter per minute to be able to make sure we don't miss that switch as those pigs continually grow. And then we'll discuss some water quality attributes later on that could be found in our PIC nutrition manual. So to start off, one of the key drivers first and foremost listed is drinker design. So, we don't get too terribly involved with the process of whether you use a fixed style nipple that you see here on the top left, a swing style that you see on the top right, or a bowl style water that you see here on the middle left. Those tend to have similar performances across nursery and grow finish phases. There's different data sets that may show one slightly better than the other in certain areas. As you see here in the nursery phase, a push style or a bowl style water may be slightly better than a nipple when it comes to average daily gain, but not that significantly better. And so we don't try to decipher between them. We have our own personal preferences of why we like those. The one thing I did want to point out here on this slide is we don't really support the use of pan waters. So pan waters, we refer to them as that flush style water that's kind of right along that slat. They kind of turn into cesspools. They fill up with urine and feces pretty easily. In the summer months when it's hot and pigs are starting to get heat stressed, they tend to lay in them, and then so that limits water access to those pigs. So we really want to minimize or limit or completely eliminate the use of any pan waters out there. The other consideration within drinker design is just drinker functionability and safety to some extent as well. You see here in the bottom left picture, it may be kind of hard to see on the screen, but there's this water used to have wings on it, and so those broke off, and so it results in a sharp edge that can ultimately cut pigs. So we want to minimize that. Wings on waters can help minimize water wastage, which is good because it minimizes the bumping of the water. But if they're not wide enough for the pig it's intended to get water to, then they're gonna be limited on access there. So we want to make sure we minimize the use of wings on those waters, and if we do utilize them, that they're wide enough or made for the size pig that we're using it for. And then likewise, we want to use just obviously proper materials. Here on the bottom right picture, we see just a T-style water, swing water that's made out of PVC pipe. We know how pigs can kind of tear things up over time, and so that's just more easily breakable. And then we're just going to have more and more water wastage as well throughout that. But there's some data here that you can kind of observe on the right that just shows different style waters may have an effect. Swinging water versus pan water, bowl versus nipple, etc. But beyond a pan water, where most every other water style or design is pretty acceptable. This is a study that was done by K-State, Carini Vieira, 2018 at K-State, that she evaluated drinker position and then also number of drinkers or number of pigs per drinker. And we'll discuss both of those data sets here in the next two slides. So this is one thing that I don't think we commonly think about. How we lay out our pen, I think it's really important. for pigs that have water easily accessible to them. And so not only from water to water, but feeder to water, and where their dunging area is going to be, where their resting area is going to be. We need to take all those things into consideration. And what you see here is between treatment 2, there was essentially 2 treatment 2s that had 2 water bowls in those pens. The second treatment had it on both sides of the feeder, 42 inches from that feeder. And then one side treatment had it just on a single side of that feeder that were only 24 inches from the feeder, and then 24 inches from the other water, as you see there depicted on the upper left diagram. You see a significant difference in average daily gain in the performance of those pigs, the growth performance of those pigs. And I think that's important to note. We technically, pigs per drinker wise probably would have enough in that pen, or that would be acceptable. But if pigs can't easily access that water, then they may end up blocking one of those waters when they go to drink out of it. And therefore, most of the time when they're drinking out of that water, they really only have one water or drinker available. And so we want to make sure that we have our drinker position. So usually for nursery, we're going to recommend, 24 to 36 inches away from any type of, if you want to call it an obstacle or something else in the pen, another drinker, a resting area, a brooder, a feeder. For finisher, we're probably going to want to be more closer to 36 to 48 inches, ideally. So then pigs can kind of space out. Again, we're more than willing to work with producers on how to lay out that barn design and that pen design, because we also want to not put them in dunging areas and resting areas, etc. So just one of those other things to consider. This is a big thing that we really try to emphasize, and I really feel that it's a non-negotiable. There's a lot of barns built across this country at 1 water for every 25 pigs, and there's been plenty of data sets over the years to kind of prove that's just simply not enough water availability, and this one shows it as well. This is one from Vieira 2018 from K-State, and so they had 3 different treatments, 1 water, 1 drinker for every 9 pigs, 1 water for 13 and a half pigs, and 1 water for 27 pigs. And you see, the graph there on the upper left, average daily gain between 13 and a half and 9 pigs, not a drastic difference, not a huge difference there, but it does significantly drop off as you get above 20 and upwards of that 25 pigs per drinker range. Likewise, I think it's important to note here percentage. I like that they collected percent of days with cups cleaned. We get that comment a lot out in the field that, hey, if the pigs are dunging in it, if that water's dirty, do they really need it? And the answer is yes. If they're kept clean, if they're clean daily or clean as needed, pigs will drink out of it, pigs will use it, and pigs will grow better as a result of that. So we want to make sure that we're cleaning those waters every day or as needed. Our rule of thumb is you should be cleaning about 10% of your waters every day, or typically 10% of your waters are going to end up being fouled every day. And that somewhat aligns with what they found right around that 13 to 16% range if you had 1 water for 13 and a half pigs, which is very close to what our recommendation would be. So beyond that, once we have enough waters in that pen, we need to think about adjusting them. And adjustment doesn't necessarily greatly impact performance per se, but it probably impacts water wastage more than anything. Obviously, if it's difficult for that pig to access that water, whether it's too low, or obviously if it's too high and it can't reach it, that's going to affect performance. But more than anything, we want to adjust that water to minimize wastage. So again, we'll touch on those recommendations here in a later slide towards the end. But for a bull water, that's typically 40% of that shoulder level of that pig, smallest pig in the pen, so it kind of drinks with its head down. And then a fixed style nipple or a swing water, depending on the angle of that nipple coming out of that T-bar, whether it's 90 degrees or it's 60 degrees, 45 degrees, etc. We can then adjust that height accordingly. And it's always based on the smallest pig in the pen, so they're able to access it. Another thing, key driver of water availability would be flow rate. Our recommendations are, again, 500 milliliters per minute in the nursery and 1,000 milliliters per minute in the finisher. We don't talk a lot about pressure or PSI. We do have recommendations around that, but that's not always the greatest indicator. The greatest indicator of flow rate is actually measuring that water at the nipple. So a lot of farms have Primatech paint can lids that you use for marking sick pigs or cull pigs, etc. That white paint can lid is about 125 milliliters. So in a nursery, if you fill that up in 12 seconds, that equals 500 milliliters per minute. And if you fill that up in 6 seconds in a wean to finish barn or a finisher, that equals 1,000 milliliters per minute. So again, check 10% of your waters every day, rotate them occasionally, and in a month's time, you'll be checking all your waters on a consistent basis. So again, this is just data to support that. Nursery data here up on the top, comparing, anywhere from 175, 200 milliliters per minute upwards of 700 milliliters per minute, and its effect on feed intake, average daily gain, etc. And we see that, that 400 to 700 range, we get quite a bit better performance out of those pigs if we have the proper flow rate. I do also believe that flow rate can be too high. So that's important to note that especially in the nursery, if it's really spraying out of that water, that can scare pigs. It can be harder for them to clasp onto that nipple. So again, we really want to target that 500, probably no more than 1,000 milliliters per minute in the nursery. For grow finishing or wean to finish barn, we could accept definitely higher. So we recommend 1,000 milliliters per minute. If it's a little bit higher than that, probably not a huge concern, but obviously the higher it goes, the harder those pigs are going to be able to drink out of that water. And then likewise, you're just kind of more water wastage out of that. But comparing 500 to 1,000 milliliters per minute, we do see better performance resulting out of that. This is one thing I wanted to touch on. Dr. Patience has done a lot of work in water quality, a decade or a little over a decade ago. And so what has been found, and Brigit is also discussing some of that or revalidating some of that, is pigs are pretty resilient, as long as they're on a consistent type of water quality and it doesn't change very rapidly or readily. Pigs are pretty resilient to a wide range of water qualities. But that being said, we do encourage you to understand your water quality, measure it once a year, graph it over time, understand how it's changing or if it's changing. That may help you predict some future problems with it. Maybe not from the pig response per se, but just your filtration system, or if you need a filtration system within your barn, maybe some of the corrosiveness of some of those, some of that, what ultimately is in your water as well. So again, understand your water quality. We do have recommendations around that, typically based on, NRC or the Task Force on Water Quality. So those can be found in our nutrition manual. And I'll touch on that kind of as our take-home slide, because I think we may get to learn more about water quality in the future, which I'm pretty interested about. We're going to dive into some of the interactions and again, twofold, something extra other than those key drivers, maybe a tick less important, but still something that's really going to have an effect on water availability and what we really need to achieve to maximize performance of those pigs. So obviously this graph here from Dr. Patience is just kind of that thermoneutral zone, or that maximum ambient temperature before that pig starts to have an effect on feed conversion or average daily gain at different body weights. And so if we get outside of that thermoneutral zone or outside of that maximum ambient temperature, that's when we could see decreases in average daily gain and detrimental effect on feed conversion. And so their water needs are going to change. If they're not eating as much feed, technically they don't need as much water. But that being said, if we can provide them good water or clean water, cool water, maybe we can raise that temperature up a little bit. We can get them to eat feed. So if we have plenty of water availability, it may help mitigate some of that heat stress, within a few degrees of each other. So we need to definitely understand that. I think, we give pigs a lot of credit for being really intelligent, and they are really smart animals. They're really intuitive animals, but pigs don't drink or eat consistently throughout the day. And so that's what this graph is showing. It's seasonal. The dotted line would be summer. The solid line would be winter. And so you see there's peaks throughout the day where those pigs are spending more time at the water. So it'd be really easy to say, hey, if pigs drank consistently throughout the day, we could probably get away with 1 water for every 20 pigs or 1 water for every 25 pigs. But the matter of the fact is they just don't. You know, if there's 50 pigs in a pen, they're all going to try to drink at between 7 and 9 a.m., maybe 10 a.m. in the summer. And so we need to have enough water availability to be able to support that. If not, that's when we get increased in variation. You know, our bottom end pigs start to fall out quicker. And so we want to make sure that's where we have the water availability during those peak hours of the day, because they're not, as you see in this graph, drinking near as much in that heat of the day in the summer. And it's kind of reversed there in the winter. So we need to make sure we understand that. Likewise, we need to understand the capabilities of our barn. So if the upper end of the thermal neutral zone is 74 degrees, we're going to reach that a lot earlier in the day in a naturally ventilated barn in the summer than if it's tunnel ventilated. Obviously, we have the wind chill effect in tunnel, and so that's going to delay it, you know, maybe an hour or 2 or 3 later on in the day. And so maybe we don't need to have as much water availability in a tunnel style barn. So again, our recommendations are kind of blanket statement and consistent across the board. But if you understand your system and what your building capabilities are, we could probably fluctuate those just ever so slightly. So that being said, if we get, again, outside of that thermal neutral zone, do we have the same water intake? Do we have the same feed intake? Do we have the same nutrient access? And those are all questions we need to ask ourselves to make sure, because ultimately water intake leads to feed intake, and feed intake leads to growth. And that's ultimately the goal that we're trying to achieve. This is kind of an interesting graph, and it's, if you really break it down, it's kind of, or at least for me, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around. But as humidity goes up, water to feed ratio goes down, and you quickly say, well, that doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't they drink more water as the humidity goes up? But in reality, they're eating less feed, right? They're starting to get heat stressed, and they have that humidity impact on them as well. No different than us is how we feel heat and humidity. We're not going to feel as good. We're not going to want to eat near as much. And so they're going to eat less. Therefore, their water to feed ratio is going to change. And so if we can intervene and do different things, cool that barn down, what have you, then we can have an effect on all that. But water to feed ratio is really important, and we have some numbers around that, but they're highly variable because they're typically based on water disappearance and not actually water intake, because obviously water intake is extremely difficult to measure. But that being said, if we could understand the water to feed ratio, we can measure that water intake, then we can predict, you know, how much feed they're eating out of that. If we understand what their feed conversion could be, we could predict average daily gains and ultimately predict when we're going to start marketing that barn and what our market cuts are going to look like. Likewise, you know, from a veterinarian perspective, and I'm not a veterinarian by any means, but then you could start to predict health outbreaks or intervene earlier on and try to get ahead of any challenges as well. And quite a few folks are doing that today. Likewise, again, another interaction would be the bulk density of the diet and the energy within that diet. So if pigs are on a lower energy diet, therefore they have to eat more pounds of feed to meet their energy needs, they're going to have to drink more water. I like to use the saltine analogy here. If I set 10 packs of saltine crackers in front of you with 0 glasses of water, you wouldn't even be able to get through one. But if I set a glass of water in front of you, chances are you'd be able to eat all 10 of those. And it's no different when it comes to the pig. The more feed they have to eat from a density perspective or just a material perspective, the more water they're going to have to drink to be able to consume all that feed. So again, if you find it may not always be economical, you need to work with your nutritionist in these instances. But if you're short on water space, or flow rate's not good, or water quality is a little bit poor, you may be able to feed her a higher energy diet. Therefore, they don't have to drink near as much feed. So you need to run those numbers, right? What's more economical, adding some more energy in the diet, or going out and buying a few more waters and installing them in those pens? Probably more often than not, in the long term, it's going to be the investment in the waters, but it's important to run those numbers as well. Just real quickly here, and kind of starting to close, is just some other interactions that we need to consider. Obviously, stocking density is a big one there. More pigs in a pen is going to equal more heat production, and then therefore what the actual temperature that those pigs feel within that pen may be different than what that probe is measuring at 4 feet high or wherever it's located at. And so they may change their water needs according to that. It's also important to understand your fluorine type. We have predominantly slats across US and North America, but in other parts of the world, they do have some solid pen designs or solid cement designs. And so slats tend to be cooler because it lets, kind of draft through those slats as well, and lets it ventilate a little bit better. So we need to understand what our capabilities are within that. And then obviously health status is a huge, huge portion of this. Work with your veterinarian to understand what the water needs of the pig should be. And likewise, I think Steve's going to touch on a lot of it, or has touched on a lot of it, is the medication by water. So we need to understand what their water intake is and capabilities are. Therefore, we can match any treatment or medication vaccine that we're running through those waters. So I just kind of wanted to leave you with a few thoughts and a few slides, and this being one of them. Again, feel free to look into our wean to finish manual. A lot of these numbers are going to be within there as well, in obviously the water availability section. And so from a pigs per water source perspective, we want to hit that 10 to 12 range. It's the same whether it's nursery, same whether it's grow finish or wean to finish. Same recommendation around there. Actually, the water to feed ratio needs are higher in nursery pigs than they are in grow finish or late marketing pigs. So water is absolutely critical earlier on to get them started on feed. Flow rates, again, we want 500 milliliters per minute in the nursery and 1,000 milliliters per minute in the finisher. Measure that with your Primatech paint can lid, 12 seconds in the nursery and 6 seconds in the finisher. The water height should be based on the smallest pig in that pen, and it should be adjusted as those pigs grow if you have the capabilities to adjust those waters. And then some other just recommendations for, more detailed growth or detailed weights there down below. Some troubleshooting, just real quick, we could have a whole entire presentation on this, but make sure you adjust the orifices in the nipple when you receive it. Make sure you know what flow rate that's going to produce. So depending on your pressure, it's probably going to change. So do you need to set them all at small, medium, or large hole within that nipple? And make sure you do that before you install them. Or if you're having water flow issues, you may check that. Obviously, with the larger hole, you're going to have less likeliness of it clogging if you do have poorer water quality. Make sure you clean your lines. This is a water disinfection table here down at the bottom. There's all kinds of different commercial products out there on the market. Find what best fits for you. But flush those water lines at least once a year, ideally twice a year, and make sure you clean those water lines out. You may have to remove the nipples, or hopefully you have a valve at the end of your line that you could flow a lot of that water just down through to be able to clean that. But do it frequently, because even an 1/8 inch on a 3/4 inch line is 30% reduction in flow. And that's going to have a big detrimental effect on those pigs. And then obviously use the proper supply line for peak water consumption out throughout the day. Again, they don't drink consistently 24/7. They have peak hours throughout the day, and make sure you understand that and design your barn around it. I just wanted to leave you with some kind of parting thoughts and some challenges. That's kind of how I like to, at some of these conferences, leave the audience with some things that we can do better or better understand. So Dr. Patience has done some great work on understanding water quality and its effect on pigs, and how pigs are pretty resilient to that water quality. But I think some of that information needs updated and just dove in further. And I think Brigit is looking into a lot of that. So I'm really intrigued by some of her work and what's going to come out of it in the future. Likewise, and this was a paper published recently. It really, caught me by surprise. But talking about water quality, it may not necessarily show up in average daily gain numbers or feed conversion numbers, feed intake numbers, the production numbers that we typically measure day in and day out. But they found that it affects the microbiome of that pig. So if that pig is forced or given a certain water quality, or has to drink a certain water quality profile, then that's going to have an effect on what grows in its microbiome, essentially, or what are those microflora in its microbiome that ultimately help with digestion and everything. So again, not a veterinarian, not a nutritionist, more of a production scientist than anything. But as we better understand the microbiome, I think we're going to better understand how water quality affects that. And then ultimately, we may be able to choose a certain water quality that's going to lead to a more beneficial microbiome that's going to help with growth, help with average daily gain, help with feed intake, maybe help with combating some diseases and some challenges as well. So I'm really hoping there's more money spent researching that area in the future. Likewise, this is kind of older, but when I found this research paper, it intrigued me as well. We talk about slower growth in the summer, heat stress, etc. If we could provide a cooler water source, would that change that? Could we mitigate some of that heat stress if we could provide the pigs with maybe not ice cold water, but cooler water versus heated water? That being said, peak hours of the day, it's probably cooler water that's coming out of a well or some type of public water source, maybe even a pond. But that first hour, if pigs haven't drank out of that water for an hour or two, it may start to heat up in that room. Even in the winter, when we're running propane heaters, forced air heaters, depending on where they're located at, that water can kind of get heated up a little bit. So just understanding what the ideal temperature is for that pig to maximize growth, I think is a big opportunity. And then lastly, pretty simple but extremely complex to actually narrow down, is what are the water consumption needs? What is the actual intake based on their growth curve that the pig needs? And as we better understand that, we better understand water to feed intake ratio, then we can make more accurate predictions on marketing of those pigs, health status of those pigs, when to intervene with health interventions, etc. So again, just an area that I hope continues to get some interest for some research dollars, and we can better learn about that. So I know I'm near the end of the slides, but there's, I'll leave you with, there is a chat box. So if you do have any questions throughout these presentations or throughout mine, or I guess here at the end of mine, feel free to add those in, and we'll try to get those answered for you. So with that, I thank you for your time, and hopefully you had something to take away from the slides presented to you today.
Thank you, Nat, for such important and useful information. Well, to summary, today we have seen 4 good presentations, all the way from basic aspects of water requirements in young pigs from Dr. Patient, a specific project to the importance of water quality within the state of Minnesota, to presentations from Steve Little in Australia on the medications, and finally from Nat Stats from PIC into the apply and recommendations or applies water management aspects. With that, remember to use the chat function of the console of the Farm Progress system to interact with with the speakers. Even though we have a remote conference, this is a good opportunity, and we have good resources for you to interact with the speakers. I want to finally close this workshop this morning, reminding you about our next workshop, sponsored by the National Pork Board, the survivability workshop, which will start at 10:30 a.m. This is an important project and an important topic where you will find first-hand information from the researchers doing the work on this important topic of survivability. With that, thank you, everybody.